So you've dropped a whole stack of articles about this Algemene Politieke Beschouwingen on me.
Right.
And honestly, at first glance, Dutch politics, not exactly my go-to for weekend reading.
Okay, fair enough.
But something tells me this debate, this thing, it was a little more exciting than your average parliamentary procedure.
Oh, you have no idea.
So give it to me. What's the inside scoop?
Okay, picture this. Okay. The Dutch government, they've just laid out their big plans for the year, right?
Right.
Their budget, their priorities, everything.
Okay.
And now they're standing in Parliament, facing down a room full of politicians, and everyone has an opinion about it.
So kind of like our State of the Union, but with a Dutch twist.
Exactly. But there's a key difference here. The Netherlands has a multi-party system. It's not just, two sides battling it out. We're talking a whole spectrum of parties here, all vying for influence.
Yeah.
And this debate, this happened right after the government presented their plans and budget, so the stakes were really high.
Yeah, I bet. I'm seeing headlines about asylum seekers, tax hikes. There was even, was there even a comparison to an elephant in a china shop?
Yeah, that pretty much sums up the mood.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Where do we even begin?
Let's start with what's probably the biggest flashpoint. The government's plan to tighten asylum rules.
Okay.
They're even considering using emergency powers to do it, which has a lot of people, concerned.
Emergency powers, that sounds serious.
Yeah, it is.
So what does that actually mean, like, in the Dutch context?
Okay, so basically, it gives the government the ability to kind of, bypass the usual legislative processes, and they can implement these measures really quickly in situations they deem critical, urgent.
So we're talking like a state of emergency.
Well, not quite a full-blown state of emergency, but yeah, think back to the economic crisis a few years ago, remember?
Right.
Emergency powers were used then to stabilize things, the financial system.
Right. So using those powers for asylum seekers, I mean, that kind of implies a certain level of urgency.
It does, yeah. And it definitely ruffled some feathers, let me tell you.
Yeah, no, I bet. And it sounds like it got even more interesting when they started talking about the EU's asylum policy.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
You mentioned an elephant in a china shop.
Yeah, that was D66 leader Rob Jetten. He made that comparison, and it was pretty spot on.
So what's the backstory there? Why is the EU policy causing such a stir in Dutch politics?
Well, there's this, a growing sentiment among some in Dutch society that the current system, it's just not sustainable.
Yeah.
They think it puts too much strain on resources and social systems, that kind of thing. And when the government even hinted at maybe opting out of the EU's policy, it really touched a nerve, let me tell you.
So we've got potential changes to asylum rules, and now this whole debate over EU policy. What else got people fired up?
Well, you can't have a good political debate without talking about taxes.
True.
And yeah, the government's proposed tax increases, those definitely didn't go over well, to put it lightly.
Oh, how so?
Especially controversial was this VAT hike on sports and cultural activities, even got called a small disaster by one party leader.
Ouch. That's got to sting a little.
Yeah, not exactly what they wanted to hear.
So we've got asylum, taxes, EU relations. Sounds like a pretty full plate.
And we haven't even gotten to the players yet.
The players.
Yeah, to really understand this whole thing, we need to take a look at who's who in this political arena. I've got a list here of all the party leaders who were at this debate.
All right, let's meet the players then. Who are we dealing with? Lots of familiar names here. Geert Wilders, obviously, but then some newer faces too, like Laurens Dassen from Volt, right?
Yeah, it's a real mix of, those veterans of Dutch politics and some of the rising stars.
Right. So let's start with, you can't talk about Dutch politics without mentioning Geert Wilders.
Right. Oh, absolutely not.
And his Party for Freedom, the PVV.
Right.
Their clashes with, everyone, really, but especially on immigration.
Oh, yeah.
They're legendary.
It's a long-standing rivalry, for sure, even with the current Prime Minister Scoop's party.
So I'm guessing Wilders used this debate to, really hammer home his party's stance on immigration.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. He didn't hold back, let's put it that way.
What'd he say?
Well, he basically used his time to reiterate the PVV's, their usual hardline stance, calling for stricter border controls, a significant reduction in asylum seekers.
Right.
Which, that's not really a surprise coming from Wilders, right? But it's a pretty savvy political move if you think about it.
How so?
Well, by tapping into those anxieties, and let's be honest, they're there, surrounding immigration, He's really good at solidifying his base and potentially even drawing in voters from other parties who, show those concerns.
So it's not just about the issue itself, it's about, like, the political game, too.
Exactly. Whether those anxieties are justified, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But there's no denying that Wilders knows how to, play to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've got Wilders doing his thing. What about some of these newer parties, like this Volt party with Dassin?
Right. So they're relatively new to the scene, at least compared to Wilders. And they've really gained some ground, especially among younger voters, people who are maybe more internationally minded.
Okay.
And their platform is really interesting. It's this very progressive pan-European approach, which, if you think about it, is like the complete opposite of what Wilders and the PVV are putting out there.
A stark contrast, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So for Volt, this debate, it was a chance for them to really showcase their vision for the Netherlands.
To kind of set themselves apart.
Exactly, yeah.
So we've got Wilders, rallying his base. We've got Volt trying to win over new voters. It sounds like a microcosm of, the broader political landscape.
Yeah, for sure.
What about the more, I don't know, I hesitate to say middle ground parties, but...
No, you're right. The ones kind of in between the extremes.
Yeah, like the CDA, the Christian Uni, how'd they play into all of this?
Right. So they're interesting because they often do occupy that middle ground. They're focused on, issues like social justice, family values. And because of that, they often end up as these kingmakers in coalition governments.
Because they could go either way.
Exactly. Their stance on any given issue, it can literally make or break a coalition. So even though they might not have the most extreme views, they hold a lot of power.
That is fascinating. It really is like this high-stakes game of chess.
Oh, it absolutely is.
Where every move, even the small ones, can have huge consequences. But it's not just about the individual parties, is it? We've also got these kind of temporary alliances forming and dissolving depending on the issue.
Oh, yeah, all the time. Look at the debate on asylum policy, for example. So you had GroenLinks and the Party for the Animals. Both of them, really strong stances on animal welfare, environmental issues, but they actually joined forces to oppose the government's proposed tightening of those asylum rules.
Interesting. So even on that one issue, we're seeing like a range of perspectives.
Oh, yeah. And it gets more complicated. So they were arguing for more compassionate policies, really drawing attention to the human cost of stricter regulations. But then on the other side, you have parties like the PVV, who we were just talking about, doubling down, calling for even tougher measures.
Right. So it really highlights how divisive these issues can be.
Absolutely. And then you've got parties like, I don't know if you remember, D66. They're more, I guess you could say, centrist, very pro-European Union. And while they generally support the EU's asylum system, they also voice some pretty strong concerns about, how it's currently being implemented.
Okay.
They want a more balanced approach, something that's actually sustainable in the long run.
So even within the debate over a single issue, we've got all these different perspectives, potential alliances forming.
Exactly. And that's the whole thing with a multi-party system, right?
Okay.
The constant need to find that common ground, build consensus, which honestly isn't always easy.
I bet. And that kind of leads us to the big question, right?
What is that?
What does this all actually mean? Like, what can we actually glean from this whole political showdown in the Netherlands? So we've heard all the speeches, all the different arguments, all these different parties kind of, jockeying for position. What does it tell us? What's the takeaway about, the state of Dutch politics right now?
I think what we're seeing here is a nation at a crossroads.
Right.
There's this real sense of urgency about immigration, about the economy, climate change, all these huge issues.
Right.
And that creates tension within the government, obviously, but also across society.
So this isn't just some abstract political game. Like, real people are feeling the impact of these debates.
Absolutely, yeah. Because the outcomes, they're going to directly shape policies, priorities, the direction the Netherlands takes in the coming years.
Right.
This is important stuff.
Yeah. And speaking of direction, I keep thinking about that debate over emergency powers for asylum rules. Does that signal something bigger, maybe a broader shift in Dutch politics?
Yeah.
Like, are we seeing a move towards more decisive, even if maybe controversial action?
It's a really good question, and it's one that I've been thinking about a lot, too. Those emergency powers during the economic crisis we talked about, those were always meant to be temporary, right? It's just to address that specific crisis.
Right.
But using them for asylum seekers, I don't know. It suggests something a little more permanent.
Like a more kind of hardline approach?
Potentially, yeah. But I think it's bigger than just being tough on one issue.
Okay.
It's about, this willingness to maybe circumvent the traditional processes, which, that could have some real consequences down the line on how policies are made, how they're implemented.
And how does that affect, not just this one issue, but how does that affect the future of Dutch politics?
Right, exactly. And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Does it lead to even more political fragmentation? Do we see parties taking even more extreme positions just to, stand out from the crowd?
Right.
Or will it force them to find new ways to actually work together, to compromise?
Right, right.
Honestly, it's hard to say for sure.
So Dutch politics, full of surprises as always, I guess.
Never boring, that's for sure.
Well, I have to say, you've definitely made Dutch politics a whole lot more interesting.
Well, that's my job, right?
You've done it well.
Yeah.
And for everyone listening, next time you hear about Dutch politics, remember there's always more to the story, always something going on beneath the surface. And, maybe we'll have to do another deep dive soon, because I have a feeling this is just the beginning.
Always happy to geek out about Dutch politics with you.
Thanks for joining us today, everybody.
See you next time.